Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Manufacturing Hub, a slightly unusual time for us this week. We are live on Monday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:30 p.m. Pacific. We wanted to bring you the clips as soon as possible from the ICC that was only 2 weeks ago. And to be honest with you, I've been doing some on-site work and other types of engagements that it feels almost like an eternity, but we'll get into some of those conversations in just a second. So our goal again is to always bring you interesting conversations and content from the industry. We had filmed a couple of conversations during ICC. We have also gone live on two of those episodes during the week of ICC. So if you want to look back on the episodes that Dave and I did pre ICC as well as towards the end of ICC at Sepasoft, which was extremely interesting. So those are all going to be on YouTube, on LinkedIn, as well as Twitch and Facebook if you're following from those platforms. That being said, today we wanted to, like I said, bring you the clip that we had together with Colby, who is the CEO of Inductive Automation. So, of course, he has a lot of information as well as insight when it comes to how the company was founded, the history of the company, and ultimately where the company is going into the future. He decides on a lot of the, I guess, paths to take when it comes to not only inductive automation, but also some of the impacts on us as systems integrators and end users. Therefore, I think that conversation was extremely interesting. Before we dive into maybe some of our own conversation and then play the video, Dave, do you have any thoughts on maybe takeaways since we were at ICC?
Yeah, no, Vlad, I would say overall I agree. It has been a very short time, but it feels like it absolutely could be a long time. I guess housekeeping wise, I would say that we'll probably have the other two episodes that we shot from ICC also coming out the next couple of Mondays. So you guys hang out, stick along. We'll be on Mondays dropping these episodes, which are all super fun. And I'm happy that we have been able to go do those. I'm just checking. For some reason, I don't show our stream live on LinkedIn. I see my chat, but I don't show our stream live on LinkedIn, which is absolutely perfect and par for the course. But no, I would say overall, it's a good conversation. I think that having a bunch of the conversations that we've been having around the ecosystem and everything else have been really good, and I'm looking forward to get these out. I'm looking forward to kind of get the thoughts and the feedback of everyone who was at ICC who may not have been able to go watch these live, or be part of the conversations, and get them out for everyone to go ahead and watch. Vlad, I know you said you had some thoughts on ignition that you wanted to go ahead and bring up.
Yeah, so I would say like the biggest thought, right? Because I ultimately rewatched our conversation with Colby since I did a little bit of editing on those clips and I guess the entire video. And so one of the thoughts, that keeps coming back on the industrial automation space, not only ignition specifically, but I think it's a huge challenge to encompass the functionality for, ignition for all the various use cases that we have. And I think we've kind of asked Colby to comment maybe on that on how they pick different features. But I guess I spoke to individuals in very different verticals over the last couple of weeks that, to whom I sort of explained what my perception was of 8.3. And I think it's just interesting to recognize how many different things people are doing across not only manufacturing but different verticals of manufacturing and also things outside of manufacturing, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, if you take an application, so I work a lot in food and beverage facilities. Well, if you take an application for a food and beverage asset, right, whether that's a batching line or packaging line, it's going to be vastly different than someone building an application for oil and gas, for example, right? So we saw the build-a-thon, which was more of a gas station type of a build, but the ultimate application allowed you to look at different sites via a map, then you select and you can kind of drill into a site, which is not something you'd see in food and beverage, for example. But on the flip side, you see a lot more data, a lot more charts, a lot more sort of this batch processing, replay, and maybe troubleshooting. And then you could take very extreme examples, something like vertical farming, for example, or data centers, or I've heard farmers starting to use ignition. So I think it's interesting, but it's also a challenge. So if you look at something like Shopify, for example, right? So Shopify is a massive company that provides e-commerce websites, but to them, if I'm selling something as big as, let's say, vehicles on an e-commerce website, or I'm selling, you know, pens or notebooks on a website, at the end of the day, it's still an e-commerce platform. With Ignition, the challenge must be massive in figuring out what to build. Which brings me, maybe to the whole announcement of 8.3. I still, I guess, had thoughts as to how they prioritize development, and ultimately, because this impacts us as integrators, what needs to be sort of built across different verticals, but is also general enough to provide functionality for all users. And to be honest with you, I don't have a clear answer. I think if I was maybe in Inductive's position, and this is just a hypothesis, you can either use maybe feedback from different integrators. I think you can use sales from different integrators. You can probably have a system of requests, but I'm curious maybe what your thoughts are, Dave, on how would Inductive prioritize, which features to focus on because of the very vast user base, I want to say, for Ignition.
Absolutely. So I imagine that it's changed over the years, and I haven't been as involved in the feature requests and the voting on the forums as I once was when I was an integrator. But I would say that there's first and foremost a lot of user feedback. So the inductive automation forums are super popular, right? There are lots of opportunities to go have conversations and post cool things and features and do some learnings on the forums. And then there are opportunities to vote as to kind of features and functions that are important to some groups, or I suppose that are important to you. I would say, kind of beyond that, and to my general understanding, lots of the overarching solutions that we're seeing here at 8.3 have been in the roadmap for probably 6 or 8 or 10 years. Back when 8.0 was launched, when Perspective was launched, there was the conversation of what we now call Power Historian coming out, and then that was planned to go launch with 8.3, which was the next major update that they were going to do. I'm not sure any of us realized it was going to be 6 or 7 years later, but the plan was for that to launch on 8.3. So my assumption is that there is a fairly long roadmap, and it's not like they're going to be done with some of these features and functions and then the thought is, okay, what's next? It's very much, hey, this is what we're going to go spend the next, I don't know, 24 to 60 months working on. You can go add features and functions, go add and remove features and functions in there, but to my understanding is there is a roadmap and a plan of what that looks like. But to your point, Vlad, I think at the end of the day, people vote with money. And if there is lots of demand from one vertical or one size company, enterprise or otherwise, you're absolutely going to go see some of that prioritized if there's opportunity there. And I think that that's what we've seen on the enterprise side with a bunch of the event streams. I think that's what we've seen on the power historian side with the calls for updates, modifications, changes off of just straight SQL Server, which you can still do, but now there are some other options. I think that's what we've seen with the new scripting format where you can use different languages that is above Python 2.7, right? So I think we've seen lots of major changes and major moves from that. And I think some of those are community driven, and I think some of those are yeah, I think some of those are roadmap driven, like perspective forms and offline mode. I've talked about it here once or twice. I think I talk about it in the conversation that we have with Colby coming up in just a couple of moments. But I'm a huge fan of that, right? And that is something that, in theory, could have been delivered originally with perspective, but because time and features and functions and otherwise is now here on 8.3. So to my understanding, again, I am pretty sure that there is a good roadmap of what is going on. and it's not just kind of we throw it out and here we go. So having said that, I think that there's a good roadmap. It's not a conversation that I've had with the inductive group recently, nor is it something that we could go probably talk about the private roadmap publicly on the live stream. But
Yeah.
having said that, to my understanding, is the organization that is inductive is growing, and as they're growing, they have a fairly good roadmap. And between Colby and Travis and Kevin and everyone else, um, there's a lot of, again, very early for 25 years, 20, 25 years, having been at inductive, and then even before that, uh going through the process of knowing where they want to go build this to.
Yeah, and like I said again, I don't think I have a very clear answer myself. I understand how challenging it can be, right? And so to bring this back to some of the conversations I've been having, I've mentioned even the changes since perspective and I guess some of the additions in 8.3 to perspective. And even a couple of individuals kind of told me like you're using perspective, why? They're still building applications on vision, which is again, it's interesting how certain industries are just doing things in a different fashion. But look, it's neither
So
here nor yeah.
I guess if I can make a comment to that, I would say I don't. There are no industries whose industry standard is still vision and not perspective. There are organizations that I talked to as recently as last year who are still running 7.9 because they hadn't updated. But there is no industry in which it's standard to go build everything on vision, because if you're building on vision, then you're building very legacy HMI, basically HMI only displays. You have none of that opportunity for HTML displays. You've got none of that other opportunity that perspective gives you. It's a completely different process to go through. And some of your legacy HMI designers are not going to be as good while moving from vision to perspective. But there is no industry in which it's standard to go build on vision.
Well, which is exactly my point, right? And I'm telling you right now that there's still projects running on vision and being developed on vision. So it's a huge challenge for inductive, I guess, to keep support. And I think they demonstrated maybe the end of life roadmap as well at some point where it was going to be discontinued. I don't remember it at the top of my head, but again, I
I
think the point is how do you reconcile all these variations in all these different industries, but also the fact that you cannot necessarily like as an example of an iPhone or of an Android phone, you can pull in the data based on usage to understand what people are doing. In this case, I would be surprised if you'd be able to see what kind of connectors, what kind of data, what kind of information is being passed. So I think it adds like an extra layer of difficulty where you need to rely on people telling you, hey, we need A, B, C, D. And I think some of those things will be sort of obvious, right? But a lot of those things are not necessarily easy to communicate. And also, my question, the earlier question, it was not
Mhm.
only to ponder it in a general sense, but to maybe give some of our listeners or viewers an idea of what they can do if they're working on these sorts of applications, running into problems, which channels to go through to maybe ask for, whether that's roadmap updates or certain features, et cetera, et cetera. Because I know engineers in many ways don't always speak up, right? It's going to be maybe a select few that are going to be vocal on those forums or in whatever sessions. So anyways, I think it's just interesting. I think it certainly has given me some food for thought since we had the many conversations at ICC as to what is possible, what's still currently out there, what people are doing, and how diverse these applications are.
Absolutely. I guess let me just make one comment revision. I am not under the impression that they are going to stop supporting vision at any point. I do not believe there is an end of life roadmap for vision.
I think it's
Um,
7.9, not vision.
oh, 7.9, yes. Vision is still a visualization opportunity,
Right.
and will be, yes, but 7.9 will have an end of life. I guess my comment was I don't know any large group who is still building on Vision today, 6 years after 8.0 is launched, as opposed to building on perspective. There was a not insignificant amount of back and forth in the first probably year or 2 years after the launch of perspective as to, do we build HMIs in Vision and do we build everything else in perspective, before it became fairly evident that it, for the vast majority of people in applications, it just makes sense to build everything in perspective, for cost reasons and other reasons, and the fact that you can basically infinitely scale a perspective application, as opposed to you have very specific resolutions on Vision applications. So 7.9 will have an end of life. I would implore anyone who is still running 7.9, to please upgrade. Yes, to please upgrade, or maybe hold off on upgrading until 8.3 launches and then just go through the painful process of updating to, I don't, you probably have to update 8.0 to 8.1 to 8.3. But yes, I there is very little reason to still be developing on Vision, assuming you're on an 8.1 platform looking to move to 8.3. If you guys
Well,
are developing specifically on Vision and there's a specific application, I would love to know about it. So please send your hate mail or otherwise to me and let me know why you're still developing on Vision, in a web native world.
look, maybe I can make some introductions, Dave, to groups that are not not large groups, but are developing on Vision, and we can have some of those separate conversations. But regardless, I think it is still an option. I think it is still supported. So I think it is an important piece of the manufacturing, let's call it, puzzle. To move us along, right? So I think that again, uh, the conversation with Colby gives us a bit of an introduction into inductive automation. I think it was very interesting. I hope that we can bring him on another time. We also had a good conversation with Travis Cox that I believe you mentioned in that conversation, but we didn't have the exact episode. Um,
Do you
do we
have the
have the?
episode number?
I do not. That's why I'm putting you
Vlad,
on the
Vlad,
spot to
if
have the
if
episode.
if you, again, we've gone through this. If you're going to call out a episode number that I have missed, then uh,
Look at that.
th-
Episode 118. We'll have it in the
okay,
show notes. Um,
perfect.
in other case, Dave, any thoughts and or ideas before we get into Colby?
No, guys, if you're watching, this is awesome. If you were trying to watch on LinkedIn, for some reason we haven't gone live, so we will go ahead and relaunch this whole episode at some point on LinkedIn so that everyone can go ahead and follow and watch along for that. Vlad and I are going to go hit the play button for Colby in just a moment. Just a couple of notes. If you guys are watching along for the first time, absolutely welcome. We normally go live on Wednesdays at about 4 o'clock East Coast time. This is episode 181. We've got a couple more episodes from ICC coming out. Beyond that, my only other note is Vlad and I will be here through the conversation. If you guys have thoughts, comments, or otherwise, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat. The first couple of minutes with Colby, there was a technical issue on the recording end. And so bear with us for the first couple of minutes as we get through that until we get to all of our normal audio and video goodness. Having said that, I'm going to go hit the play button and we will talk to you guys live on when? We'll go talk to you guys live on Wednesday.
Mhm.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. ICC for you guys watching here.
Today, we've got a super special guest, Colby. Colby, you are the CEO of Inductive Automation. Do I have that correct? Very excited to go talk about 8.3, which is the release that we had less than 24 hours ago, real time. Talk about some of the features, which is maybe the only conversation that's been happening in the last 24 hours here in Folsom. But before that, Colby, can you tell us a little bit more about your history and how you helped build Inductive Automation to what it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2003, I was a student at UC Davis down the road from Sacramento, and there was somebody in my class who was a family friend of Steve and Wendy Heckman. Now, Steve and Wendy at that time, they had a company called Cometrics, an integration company. They had run that for, I think, about 15 or 20 years at that time. So Steve had very clear ideas of some utilities, some software that, as an integrator, he wished existed, right? And so through this, friend, I was approached, and they knew I was doing contract development and stuff like that. And he said, "Hey, I know this guy. He has an idea. He has no idea how to make it happen. Maybe you should talk to him." So that's it. That's how it all started. I went down there. I met Steve. I didn't know anything about the industrial world. He told me, "Hey, it's gonna be real simple. We got OPC. It's in every factory. We just got to put in the database." He had drawings, like specific drawings of what he wanted. So it was very straightforward. And we started with that, and immediately after, my good friend Carl Gould, he's one of my good friends at Davis, and I said, "Hey, you need to come in here and help out," and that's how it kind of got going. And so it's been 22 years now.
Wow. That is crazy. I will say for our listeners at home, we had a long conversation with Travis Cox. We'll go link the episode so you guys can go watch it if we want to dig into the nitty gritty details of integrator versus solution and kind of that entire path. That was a really fun conversation, but that is like hours long conversation. So,
and funny side note, I met Travis when he was 13. We're 3 years apart, but him and I are also very good friends. He came to Davis along with me, and so this has really been a friendly affair.
Absolutely. For me, it feels like the core of inductive automation, folks. The vast majority of you have been here for a very long time, and at this point have to be very good friends. Whether you started out knowing each other or not, you have to.
I think it's more amazing that we are still friends. I think we were very good friends to begin with. The fact that we've been able to work together for 22 years is pretty amazing.
I wasn't going to say that, but that was exactly what I was thinking.
We have a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Colby, to ask you maybe like a follow-up on that side as well on the structure of inductive automation. Maybe you've mentioned you started off as a developer, right? So I believe that it's a company, and I'd love to see that it's built by engineers for engineers.
Yes.
Maybe is that by design? Is that just how things came through? And what was your experience like, going through those?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say. I mean, by design makes you think we had a master plan and all this. It was really, but it is probably practically what happened because. Coming out of a systems integrator, that initial few versions of the software were tools for that integrator to win business, to distinguish themselves, right? We did that for a few years. But Steve was very cognizant, really knew, had been in integration for a long time. And so he knew, first of all, that, selling software is a little bit easier, ideally, I think, than being out there in the plant floor being called at 3 a.m. So we wanted to get into that. But, most integrators don't want to buy software from another integrator, So we had to split that off. And so, but it's true, I think an important point that I love to emphasize today is that inductive automation has grown organically out of that bootstrap start. We had no outside funding. The integration company let us do that over the years. We didn't have to worry about where to get money at. It was a very natural process. And so it is true that we're essentially run by engineers because we've just been trying to build solutions for 22 years, So I think it's really, now that I'm in this role, I think about it a lot. I try to capture that value because I think it's really unique in the industry. So
absolutely, I would agree. For me, it's always amazing when engineering organizations like Inductive can go through the process of building, but also continuing to allow the people who are there to continue to move up in ranks. And I feel like it's very often you see people who have been at Inductive for years and years, and you always see the promotions and how Inductive seems to do a really good job from promoting within while keeping those core values. And to me, that's a very impressive part of this.
It is, and it's not easy because growing is hard.
Yes.
We started off saying, sometimes you get asked now, like, did you envision this? That's hard. No, we wanted to start off, we wanted to be successful, of course, but then along the way, it's been quite an interesting journey. But ultimately, yes, we're very fortunate that the vast majority of our senior members have been here for 10, 12, a long time.
Absolutely.
If I can again like follow up on that before we dive into 8.3, I think for me some of the differentiators, Inductive University, right? I think it's very unique on how you guys have done things and allowed the entire community of not only integrators but everyone to get acquainted with ignition, but also understand to a deeper level how they can fit it into their projects. The partner program, right? There's a very unique, I think, way to work with both hardware and software companies to allow them to work, either provide ignition or provide modules that you guys partner with. So I'm curious, maybe on that side, what are your thoughts on, again, being a differentiator in our space? And maybe also ask you on the flip side, some of the challenges maybe there, but also some of the wins.
Yeah, one of our early differentiators was simply to have unlimited licensing, to not charge by data point or by screen. And that's a direct pain point of being an integrator, right? Going in there and you make a project, you want to get it in the hands of somebody else, but now we don't have another client license for that. Or the customer calls you back, and I think you all know very well, you're there to solve a problem. You don't want to have to go deal with purchasing, procurement, or whatever to add on a few more tags. So that open mentality was the start, and then it permeated then so much of our thought process. And getting started in 2003, and Carl and I being really involved in this stuff since we were teenagers, in an era where open source came into its own, it was very influential. So we've tried a lot of different things, but originally, like for example, when we created our first OPC UA server, we made it, when we created Ignition, we wanted it to be a platform that anyone could build on. We had a module marketplace where people could sell modules, maybe a little bit ahead of its time, right? But we've experimented with some of this stuff, and then we continue to evolve it, or some of those ideas come back in different forms. Inductive University is a great example of that because, and I'm always amazed because people love Inductive University and they really focus on that as like a differentiator of ours. I was just at a conference a few weeks ago, and these engineers didn't know I was standing behind them, and somebody had like Ignition on the screen, and it wasn't like, oh, Ignition's like great software. It was like, oh yeah, that's cool, but you know what they really did is cool? They had this Inductive University, and that blew me away. So that idea of creating this platform where we can put it out there for free just follows that whole kind of open mentality that we've always just tried to play around with, frankly.
Absolutely. So I think this is fantastic, and we could talk about this for hours, but I want to make sure we get to 8.3. Sure. So you were on stage and you were talking about 8.3 and some of the functions and features, and as I said, to me it's maybe the most excited I've seen the crowd since the launch of 8.0 in perspective and huge changes that you guys had. From your perspective, what's the feedback? How have you guys gotten to the 8.3 launch? Maybe what are the functions or features that excite you the most with how people are going to use moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Our numbering system's a little funny. Sometimes it seems a little underwhelming just to call this release 8.3. I try to convince Carl we should call it 9, but he wants to hold on to that.
I was going to say, I was thinking it could be 9.
It could have been. It could have been. It's substantial enough. There's a lot in it. There is a lot in it. We have grown a lot in our resources in the last few years. So our dev team today, it's quite a machine compared to just a few releases ago. Anyhow, but what we said on stage, and it is how we feel, is that this is the completion of a vision that we started with 8. Mm-hmm. Okay. The very, very quick history of our software is that we had our original products that had different names. There was 2 components. We rewrote that around 2010 and we created Ignition. Yep. And so that brought together the functionality into one place, a great name, great branding, all of this. That's where things really started to take off. That initial version was called 7.0. All right. So that's a little joke we have because the previous versions, the previous software one was version 3 and one was version 4. So we said, we'll put them together, call it version 7. There we go. So we started off with version 7 and then we went from there. So that was 2010. So we've evolved this platform for 14 years now. And I like to say it's actually really remarkable. It is the most modern 14-year-old piece of software I know of because we've been very aggressive about continuously improving it and enhancing it while maintaining backwards compatibility. With 8.0, we introduced Perspective, an entirely new way to build applications, HTML5, native, and all of that. We also rewrote the tag system, which essentially the data model, right? And that to be much more scalable, and that's unlocked a lot. At that time, we also began trying to transition the way we store resources onto disk. Okay, so these are all the different pieces that make up your gateway. And we wanted it to be compatible with source control and so on. Mm-hmm. So that was the start of that project. And then 8.1 was really like just trying to stabilize those new introductions, make them more feature complete and mature. And we really wanted to get around to completing, frankly, what we had started. And that's what 8.3 is, fundamentally. So in this release, we have all the resources are finally on disk in open JSON. They can be manipulated by outside programs or whatnot. They can be put into source control. That has a lot of benefits. But then going further along that line, the gateway configuration is a completely open REST API. So people have been over the last few years trying to do so much programmatic configuration. I don't know, there's a lot we could talk about, of course, there, but Ignition being platform independent, being very natively compatible with some of these technologies right now, Docker and Kubernetes and all this other stuff. It's very exciting. Yeah, broad strokes, that's what 8.3 represents to me, the completion of that and really making it into, frankly, the world's most modern, friendly SCADA platform.
Absolutely. I think there are lots of like highlights with event streams, with Power Historian. I think for me, the most interesting feature, one of the ones you guys announced first, is the perspective offline mode and the forms.
Sure.
And when you guys are saying that, my immediate thought is, in the past, I've developed other applications, right? Everything from like Google Sheets or Google Forms to like custom iOS apps to go solve how do we go collect information from operators when there is no cell phone reception. And so I think it opens up a huge opportunity of an entirely new series and class of applications of really taking Ignition off the plant floor into kind of anywhere you go.
Yeah, and it's funny because we've been thinking about this for so long. And in that time, what happens? Well, connectivity gets a lot better, so that the times you have less, but still, it's something we're finally delivering. But the cool thing is that we're at a place where now we're able to deliver something that we've been thinking of, but in an even better way. So like the way that works is with our native perspective applications for mobile devices, right? So we could have used HTML's 5 offline stuff, but we wrap that up into a bit better framework. That also gives you access to things like Bluetooth Low Energy and some of these the camera for barcode scan. You can do quite a bit. In fact, so here at the conference, one person who was quite excited was talking about tracking herds of horses in the outback of Australia. RFID chips in their neck, you want to come up and scan them, something like that. Who knows what kind of applications these simple building blocks can unlock.
Absolutely.
And let me follow up on that same thought, because I think like manufacturing and Ignition specifically is so diverse across like different verticals, different use cases, that I think it's extremely challenging maybe as the OEM to figure out what exactly to release, right? So I'd be curious maybe what your thought process and where do you draw some of ideas, before you come up with these features, right? And so for me, the messaging queues and the Kafka integrations are the most exciting, because I've always worked in a very traditional, like data heavy manufacturing, but I know for others, there might be other features, right? So how do you balance providing something for the entire community?
I guess it's whoever shows up and convinces us most effectively here at ICC. But no, it's always been a process of trying to stay connected to customers. These days, it's like not that Carl and I are out in the field all that much. We have this great infrastructure. Our support, like for example, our support is in-house. This is something that's really important, right? Everyone's working in the office over here. They're talking to customers every day. We can just go talk to them, right? Things like that. Our integrator program, we have such an incredible relationship with our integrators. So there's such a good conversation. Fundamentally, the track we've always tried to take is to create things that apply to the greatest number of users. So I think the main critique about Ignition is perhaps that it's broad. It's a bunch of fundamental building blocks. I hear you can do anything you want, but you have to build it, right? So that's a pro and a con, because the pro is you can build anything you want. But that's purposeful. It's not to say that we don't always want to make things easier, but it's about creating things that serve the most diverse set of users, and thus, as a result, our user base is just incredibly broad, right?
I find that, again, I think that's super interesting from just like a community perspective, right? I've also run into people who are doing things like vastly differently than, what I've seen. So I think that's a huge bonus for us working in this industry in a general sense. Let me ask you, I guess, like as a follow-up, right? So I think that we see a clear integration also of more like enterprise type of solutions that we see predominantly on the IT side. And I know that Ignition plays throughout the entire stack, ingesting data from all the way from the plant floor and then interfacing with MES, ERPs, SCADA systems, and providing all of those solutions. So I'm curious, maybe your thoughts and opinion on this IT, OT landscape, maybe some of the challenges that you guys are trying to solve and are solving.
It's fundamental to who we are. We made a comment on stage yesterday that when we created Ignition, And this really came from our original products. But when we created, the first two modules were Vision and SQL Bridge. That SQL Bridge came from our first product, Factory SQL. That's what Steve's vision was, to connect plant floor data to SQL databases. Because at the time, these systems, MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, were in use all over the IT world, but they weren't being used in the industrial world, and they could offer so much benefit. So that's our starting point. From there, we've always just tried to continue that conversation. What it does is it unlocks, you take this situation where I've recently come to call this like the wildly different engineering requirements of both sides. And I think the more conscious both sides are of this, and we're getting to a place where they're more considerate and conscientious of each other, then you can say, okay, I recognize you have a different set of requirements. The plant floor needs to be running all the time, no disruption, so on. IT wants things to be easy to manage and very updatable and dynamic and whatnot, and certain core technologies. So how can we work together? And started with simple SQL databases, but we continue that today with, for example, some of this infrastructure stuff you're talking about, the support for source control or orchestration or containerization, right? So it's just a progression. It's always about helping the plant floor engineers and managers and people go into a meeting with IT with hopefully a little more hope that they can work together and just dissolve that tension.
Absolutely, I would agree with this. Going back, last question topic, talking about the community. So I've been to ICC before. Vlad had not been to ICC before.
This is your first one?
Yes, it is, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, and so
I was going to say, ironically, I've actually developed ignition modules for some of the partners to present at ICC, but I was during COVID time, so anyways, side note.
And so for me, it's always the community, and I find it like a very intimate setting. It's really great because you get to see people, sometimes the only time you get to see people at this conference every year, and it's all the fun conversations. And for me, it's also the worldwide, we see so many of the same issues. And before this, maybe we felt like we were solving an issue on an island, and then we realized that everyone in the entire world is trying to solve the same issue. What are the highlights for you? What are the parts that make you keep wanting to, I suppose at this point, throw the conference every year?
That's a good question, because we did it for the first time in 2011, I believe. This is our 12th edition. It was so much work, so much more than we thought. And so then we're like, okay, we're stuck in for next year, so we're gonna do that, and we'll do that. We showed up at that conference and we said, hey everyone, we're not gonna do this every year, we're gonna do this every other year. That moment, first of all, they didn't react very well to that. Everyone's, we're coming anyhow, that's nice. But also something happened there, that event. And that was the first time that we had people coming up to us, and by us I mean, say Carl, myself, but all the people who were with Inductive Automation at the time, and they're saying, let me show you what I've built. Now for Carl and I, that was an amazing moment, because previous to that, we thought we knew exactly what people could build. We're building tools, they're supposed to be used a certain way, you do something with them. People showed us stuff that we never imagined. Now all of a sudden we said, if we don't keep doing this, we're not gonna know what people are doing with our software. Really a turning point. And so my favorite part today continues to be simply seeing what people are doing with the software. So this morning we had our, what we call our community keynote. We talked about what the community is doing. We give out our Firebrand Awards. If I think about it, I know what these projects are, I've seen the descriptions and whatnot, but to see it again and to see the scope and scale of how ignition is being used, the impact it's having, it's amazing. I think it's inspirational for all of us. It certainly helps our whole team to stay motivated to do what they do, but that's far and away my favorite aspect of it. Second point that's important, I don't know how we pulled it off, but when you come here, everyone talks.
Yes.
So one thing people always comment on is that you have people from all over the world, but all different types of people, plant floor engineers, all the way up to executives from some of the world's largest companies, and everyone just talks to each other. So integrators who should be competitors are talking to each other, best practices. So that's a very magical effect, frankly.
Absolutely, I agree. So when I first came here 6 years ago, I sat on the integrator panel with Francisco Carrion, who is now Inductive Automation Australia, and Glenn Fry. I actually sat in between the two of them, and have seen and talked to them both so much, just almost exclusively ever since. And so you meet lots of fun people, and for me, it's always you get to come see friends, and you get to make new friends.
Yeah, that's right. We get to see, there are plenty of people here who've been here for all 11 years. We did 2 years virtual, of course. But the interesting statistic is that 60% of these attendees are here for the first time. But you're here for the first time, and yet you've been in this ecosystem for quite a while, right? So it's like stuff like that. A lot of companies who've been around for a while, they send new people. It's a nice little
it's almost like a sourdough starter that keeps perpetuating itself.
Colby, this has been amazing. I look forward to hopefully bringing manufacturing up here for many years to come as we continue to watch the community grow. What's maybe the number one thing you want to tell people who haven't been to an ICC if they look to come for 2025?
We just announced that in 2025, we will be hosting it at the Sacramento Convention Center for the first time. So for all of these years, we've had it here. It's a wonderful facility, but it has a capacity of about 800 people. And that's probably pushing it. So we've been asked over and over, when are you going to expand it? We've been a little bit hesitant because it is such a special environment. But that said, we're very excited next year to expand it. We'll have more space. I think the partner ecosystem, the technology ecosystem out there will benefit from that, bringing more people in. I think combined with what we're releasing and the way it's going to mature over the next year will be a very exciting time to see, I think, the benefits of what we've announced in